Welcome to Mythic Albion, a journey through Britain's folklore, legends and sacred landscapes. I'm your host Tom, and today we step back into England's distant past, to a time before the construction of churches, crosses and saints carved into stone, a time when another England existed. An England of dark forests and open skies, of timber halls and cold rivers, of firelight and fear. An England that spoke to gods, not through books, but through blood, breath and toil. The time of the Anglo-Saxons, a cultural group that inhabited much of England and southeastern Scotland during the early Middle Ages. And with the Anglo-Saxons was Anglo-Saxon paganism. This heathenry was a religion based on ancient pagan religions deriving from various Germanic tribes such as the Angles, Jutes, Saxons and a smattering of the Frisians. And this religion was greatly related to the ancient Norse religion and their associated gods. But not gods that were distant, residing beyond the stars. Gods that walked the land, watching and rubbing shoulders with humanity. And among them all, one god stood apart, a wanderer, a king of the dead and gods alike, a god who paid for knowledge with his own divine flesh. This is the age of the Old English gods. The world before Christ. When Rome withdrew from Britain, it left behind roads and ruins, but no answers. A fractured land with kingdoms falling as quickly as they had arisen. The men from across the sea brought not only iron and fire with them, but belief and paganism. The term paganism comes from the Latin term paganus, which means rural or civilian. Used in the early 4th century by the first European Christians, it was a term used to describe people practicing polytheism. This phrase had derogatory connotation to describe those not of the Christian faith. But unlike Christianity, the world of Anglo-Saxon paganism was not governed by salvation, but by the weird. What we would call fate or karma today. Something unseen and unavoidable. Imagine something like a thread spun long before man drew breath and cut without warning. There were no holy books and no promises of heaven, only what one does in this life. The land, the sea and the sky itself was considered holy, but the gods were not seen as forgiving or good. They were seen as necessary. Woden, All-Father of the English. Of all the ancient English gods, Woden is the best attested. His counterpart in Norse mythology is Odin. He is sometimes depicted as a horseback warrior wielding a spear, riding Sleipnir, an 8-legged horse. He is the foremost of the gods and the one about whom we know the most about due to a handful of narrative sources. He is associated with kings, wisdom, war, poetry, and the soul's passage to the afterlife. But he is also known as the Wanderer, often seen as a god embarking on a long, solitary journey throughout creation, ever seeking knowledge and wisdom. A philomath who, despite possessing vast knowledge, would never claim to be omniscient. Often walking through the realms amongst gods and men alike, often in disguise. Despite being known as a wanderer, he is also known for his great martial prowess, represented by his spear. He is often called upon by warriors before going into battle, seeking blessings, favour and strength. Such is the power that Woden possesses, it was said he could manipulate fate itself to determine the outcome of a battle. Such was he was revered that leaders and kings would invoke his name before embarking on great battles or quests. Woden's name is derived from the Old English meaning crazy and fury. This is cognate of Odin, which meant divine madness. Both Woden and Odin coming from the old Proto-Germanic wodas that meant frenzied or raging. Whilst seen as a magnificent warrior on horseback wielding his mighty spear that could cut the heavens themselves in half, when on a quest for knowledge he would disguise himself as a wanderer in a wide-brimmed hat, cloak and staff. He was not the god of comfort, but the god of knowing too much, a cloaked figure at the edge of firelight. But knowledge is never free, even for a god. One eye sacrificed, plucked from his own head in exchange for wisdom. Never ruling from a throne, but walking the roads. His role as a god of wisdom and war is seen in the Anglo-Saxon belief that he gifted them with the runic alphabet. Runes originated from the ancient Germanic alphabet, thought to hold magical properties. But how did he gain knowledge of the runes? It was said he sacrificed himself by hanging on the world tree Yggdrasil for 9 nights to gain knowledge of the runes before being pierced by his own spear, starving and bleeding until the runes revealed themselves to him in a type of divine epiphany. This journey is recounted in an old piece of literature. I wot that I hanged on the windy tree, nights all 9, wounded by a spear and given to Woden, myself to myself on that tree, of which no one knows from what root it rises. With bread they did not sate me, nor with the drinking horn. I looked below me. I grabbed the runes up, screaming I grabbed them. I fell after that. This act of self-sacrifice drives his commitment to cause pain to his physical self, insofar as a god has a physical form, in the pursuit of wisdom. And ironically, pain can be a teacher, a gift with its meaning making you stronger. The road to inner peace can often be seen as painful. Woden also possessed 2 ravens, named Huyin and Munin, and they flew before him. Their names translating unsurprisingly to thought and memory. They were his messengers, flying out each morning to gather information and returning at dusk, reporting on what was occurring throughout the 9 realms. They in turn helped him to make wise decisions. Woden was the king of gods and outcasts alike, of poets, prophets and the dead. He gathered the fallen, warriors slain not by chance but by fate, by the weird, and he led them onward, and on storm-racked nights when the wind howled like a hunting cry, people would shut their doors, for that is when Woden would ride his mighty horse at the head of the wild hunt, gathering souls. Today, Woden might seem like something completely foreign to us, but his name still lingers. Wednesday, Woden's Day. The gods of daily life. Woden did not rule alone. There was Thunar, god of thunder and cognate to the Norse Thor. He was known as protector of the common folk, and when storms shattered the sky, it was his hammer that struck. After Woden, Thunar is considered by many to be the most popular of the Germanic gods. Thunar is best known as the god of thunder. Indeed, the name Thunar literally means thunder. He is also the son of Woden. He rides in a majestic chariot across the sky that is pulled by his 2 goats, Tangrisnir and Tangnjostra. Their names mean teeth bearer and teeth grinder, respectively. These 2 goats are known for their strength and resilience, much like their master, and they can pull this storm god and his chariot with ease. He represents the union of sky and earth, also making him the god of Mid-Danyard, the world of men. As one of the strongest of the gods, he fights and slays monsters that threaten both gods and men. While Thunar is cognate with Thor, there are also parables with the Roman god Jupiter and the Greek god Zeus. History paints a colourful image of Thunar as having a large muscular frame adorned with a fiery red beard, long red hair and a deep red cloak, wielding a mighty hammer, though in some instances a great fiery axe. While Thunar would fight many an Odin and Jotnar, even smiting the devil himself in an early Christian story, his greatest opponent was the giant serpent that surrounded Mid-Danyard, known as Midgard Worm. so almighty and epic that these battles were said to shake the heavens themselves, and that thunderstorms are the sounds of Thunar's battles, with the rumbling thunder representing the wheels of his goat-drawn chariots. If Woden was the patron saint of kingship and nobility, then Thunar was patron of the common folk, thus also having connections to farming. The Saxons often regarded Thunar as the champion of heathendom against the encroaching Christianity. Today he is remembered by the day of the week, Thursday, or Thunar's Day. Then there is Tu, the god of war, law and order. While Old English sources contain scant information about Tu, what is known is truly epic. He is the god that bound chaos itself and paid the price with his hand, understanding that order sometimes requires sacrifice. Tu is often regarded as the bravest of the gods, in which he bound the Fenrir wolf, a huge beast that grew so large that even the gods themselves feared him. Only Tu was brave enough to step forward and feed this voracious beast. But the gods feared that if he got too big, that he would eventually devour them, and made to bind him. They continuously placed chains on him, but he broke free with ease each time. It was then that the gods had Gleipnir forged. However, what came out resembled a thin strip of ribbon, but in actuality was the strongest bond known, powerful enough to even subdue the mighty Thunar. The Fenrir wolf told the gods that he would only succumb if a god would step forward, brave enough to place a hand within his maw. Tu stepped forward and placed his hand on the large wolf's tongue. With his free hand he immediately bound the wolf with the ribbon, but in the ensuing struggle, the wolf tore his hand clean off. It was then that Tu was also known as the one-handed god and the wolf's leftovers. Tu has connections to the Norse god Tyr, and also being reminiscent of Mars, the Roman god of war. He was recognised as being the most skilled in swordplay despite being one-handed. In typical Anglo legacy, another day of the week was named after one of our ancestor gods, and thus Tuesday was Tuesday, the day of the god of war and combat. And how could we forget Fria, the goddess of the hearth and fate, spinner of threads and keeper of the home, queen to Woden and mother to Thunar. Woden's wife was the goddess of love and associated with all things to do with the home, marriage and children. Also recognised as the mother of the earth, the Anglo-Saxons would look to her to provide a good harvest. Her day is Fria's day, which became Friday. As queen of the gods and the foremost of the goddesses, she would act as Woden's advisor and would often chide him about his quest for knowledge, especially at his own personal detriment. The coming of Christ. Offerings to these gods were often made: food, weapons, animals, sometimes more. A spear cast into a bog, a sword bent and broken, a body laid into the water, never to rise again. These were gods that were appeased, not praised. To anger them was to invite famine, or storm, or defeat. Sacred places were soaked with memory, places where the veil thinned and the land listened. No one asked if the gods were just, only if they were watching. And then another god arrived, not with thunder or ravens, but with a promise. One god, not many. Forgiveness instead of fate, eternity instead of the weird. The Anglo-Saxon period of England lasted around 600 years, spanning from 410 AD to 1066. The period beginning with the decline of the Roman authority, which led to the Anglo-Saxons imposing their beliefs on the current English, who were of the old Roman British. Both indigenous British deities and Roman counterparts were venerated and often synchronized together. Christianity first came to England around 180 AD during this Roman period. However, the arrival of the Saxons in the east extinguished it. In 597 AD, St. Augustine of Canterbury was chosen by Pope Gregory the Great to lead a mission to Anglo-Saxon England known as the Gregorian Mission, to convert the warlike Saxon conquerors. Despite frightening tales of these heathens, St. Augustine made the journey, where he was met with curiosity by King Ethelbert at his kingdom of Kent. It was thought there was a strategic element by going to Kent first, as Ethelbert held great influence over neighbouring kingdoms. St. Augustine landed on the Isle of Thanet and proceeded to the main town of Canterbury. King Ethelbert would convert to Christianity and allowed missionaries to preach freely. Subsequently, Augustine was consecrated as a bishop and converted many subjects, including thousands on Christmas Day 597. Despite this, he believed that Christianity should be integrated carefully and gradually, preserving existing traditions, consecrating pagan temples and festivals. No one was forced to convert in the beginning. Pagan temples were left standing. This would explain that while parts of the country still held on to pagan beliefs, they would eventually evolve and entwine with a growing Christian culture. Churches rose where groves once stood. Crosses replaced idols. The old gods were not slain, simply reframed. Woden would be quite literally demonized, though there is an interesting theory on what he would turn into. Thunar would become the thunder itself, and sacred springs would become holy wells. But belief and tradition does not vanish so easily. It waits, and it changes its face. The Anglo-Saxons ruled from around 410 through to 1066 AD, so over a period of 600 years. However, Christianity came to England around 597 AD, and while the converting to Christ was gradual at first, most Anglo-Saxons were entirely Christian by the time of the Norman invasion. In essence, the period of the Anglo-Saxons begins with the Roman forces withdrawing and ending with the invasion by the Normans. But before their conversion, the Anglo-Saxon people of England worshipped a variety of gods and goddesses, with many notable similarities to those of the Norse Pantheon. However, unlike the Norse Pantheon, information about the old gods is not so well known, yet their presence persists today. There is very little source material, but for instance, we have our days of the week. Moon's Day, Monday. Tuesday, Woden's Day, Wednesday. Thunar's Day, Thursday. Fria's Day, Friday. Saturn's Day, Saturday. And Sunday, Sun's Day. And of the Old English Pantheon, what we do know of is Woden, cognate of Odin, king of the gods associated with wisdom, war and magic. Thunar, cognate of Thor, god of thunder, storms and agriculture, associated with strength and protection. Tu, cognate of Tyr, god of war and justice. Fria, cognate of Free, goddess of love, marriage and the household. Eostra, cognate of Ostara, goddess of the spring and fertility. Saxnayat, a tribal god, possibly linked to family and kinship. Welland, cognate of Wayland, possibly a smith god associated with craftsmanship. Bretha or Rida, linked to the month of March. Sunna and Mona, personifications of the sun and moon. Aershe, the mother of the earth. Ing, possibly cognate of the Norse Fria, god of fertility. Ir Randel, a figure associated with light and dawn, possibly divine. Whilst the Anglo-Saxons did possess a written language known as Old English, this was used mostly for practical purposes rather than recording mythology. The pagan traditions here were primarily oral, stories, rituals and beliefs passed down, and with the coming of Christianity, much of that oral tradition was lost. While there is some archaeological evidence, they rarely tell a story and just indicate names or symbols. Woden is an interesting figure and differs from Odin. While both Odin and Woden are portrayed as powerful figures, unmatched in martial prowess, Woden often would take the form of an old man with a long white beard, cloak and wide-brimmed hat and staff, accompanied by his 2 ravens and 2 wolves. Given his desire for magic, wisdom and knowledge, this striking appearance makes him look like an archetypal wizard, and you would have to wonder if this was the inspiration behind Merlin, who in turn would go on to be the inspiration for other wizards such as Gandalf or Professor Dumbledore. Place name evidence of Woden exists in the form of Wensbury and Wensfield in Staffordshire, Woodsborough and Wormhill in Kent, as well as Wenslow and Wensley. He was also closely linked to early kings and warlords who believed themselves descended from Woden himself. This link was seen as one of violence and supremacy, whether that would be the battlefield or mead hall. He is also considered as the founder of Old English dynasties such as Kent. Christianity attempted to turn the pagan gods into Christian demons, and Woden was no exception. However, he continued into folklore and folk religion throughout the Middle Ages, notably becoming the leader of the wild hunt of a host of gods that would tear through the skies at Yuletide. Perhaps this master of disguise went on to become one of the most famous wizards of all time. Or did he become Father Christmas, his 8-legged stallion becoming 8 reindeer? Surely it would take someone of almost godlike ability to do what Father Christmas can do in a single night. While there are many similarities between numerous polytheistic religions from ancient Egypt to Greece, Persian, Roman and Nordic, with various gods having counterparts, it is interesting to note the similarities between the sacrifice of Woden on the World Tree and the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Both stories involve a sacrifice. Jesus sacrifices himself to God, who is part of the Holy Trinity, and Woden sacrifices himself to himself. Both refuse sustenance. Both are pierced by a spear, and both resurrect. While there are clear differences, with Woden seeking knowledge and Christ's sacrifice to absolve all of humanity's sins, the similarities are striking and beg the question: is religion, whether it be monotheistic or polytheistic, simply the same stories being told and retold over and over again? The history of Western religions are marked by 3 stages. The first is Mother Goddess civilization. Second is polytheism, belief in many gods. Thirdly was monotheism, belief in one god. Each stage represented a fundamental change in people and their understanding of the world around them. When humans began using agriculture, that is when Mother Goddess civilization arose. This type of civilization was largely based around fertility and reproduction. As a consequence, women held high status in terms of religious rituals. This would also give rise to astrology, the bird representing the divine woman and the bull representing the masculine. As populations increased and competition for resources arose, the first wars between humans began. Men were required to fight wars. Women were now seen as a valuable resource. This saw the rise of patriarchy as the men successful in war would become the new leaders. With the coming of war came the beginnings of polytheism, and their gods were also at war. Indeed, many origin stories of pantheons involve gods fighting entities such as giants or titans. The change to monotheism came about likely due to empire building, specifically the Roman Empire. A new religion was introduced called Christianity, which became a powerful religion. While other monotheistic religions may have existed before Christianity, it was Christianity that became the first monotheistic religion to achieve widespread dominance, covering vast regions including several countries in Europe. If you listen closely, the days still speak their names. Towns still celebrate them. Even the thunder overhead reminds us. Their stories still carry their echoes, in folklore, in fairy tales, in the wild hunt, in the fear of forests and the reverence of stone. Christianity did not try to claim they didn't exist. They drove them away, demonized. But you cannot kill an idea or belief, only drive it underground where it waits. Maybe some of the gods stepped back and let other stories take place. Maybe some gods simply changed forms and became fairies and fae, goblins and mist. Before saints there were gods, before scripture there were other stories, before salvation there was survival, and in the land beneath our feet those stories still linger, waiting to rise again. If you like today's episode, please share and leave a review. It helps other pilgrims find their way to the one true belief. We take a short jaunt back. While the old gods did not leave England, there have been other phenomena that have come not just to our shores, but to our airspace. Voices in the forest, eyes in the dark, but not eyes that would belong to a mythical being or a simple fox. Eyes that came as lights from something truly unknown and beyond the stars, cold, silent, watching at the edges of the world. Where men once spoke of gods and fairy folk, today they speak of visitors, visitors from beyond, of crafts without wings, beings glimpsed briefly and never fully understood. The forests are still listening, and sometimes, late at night, something else listens back. Next time we return to the woods, to the not so distant past of 1980 and Rendlesham Forest, where soldiers saw lights move between the trees, and England was reminded that the truly unknown and alien never truly left. Next time we investigate the visitors from beyond, visitors from recent times and recordings going back hundreds of years. Until then, walk wisely, and be wary of the old traveller behind you, filled with a thirst for knowledge.